It's my pleasant duty tonight to welcome you. Welcome to all members, welcome to all visitors, welcome to all freeloaders. No, I didn't mean that, I'm sorry. But certainly visitors and people who are just trying us out for the night. I'm Ian Free, I'm the treasurer, and I'm not really Ian Free, I'm really Jan Mason, but she is very busy tidying up her mother's apartment. She lost her mother recently, so she's asked me to do it. But I'll give you a joke about one of Jan's grandchildren in just a minute. I also want to say that the next event here will be on the 11th of December, and that is when our resident poet, Kevin Ireland, will be launching a new book of poems. And he's always very good at reading. Hello. I hate it when people don't have good mic technique, don't you? So Kevin will be here, and another luminary, Graham Lay, will be in the chair and helping him. I also want to say that although I'm the treasurer, my time as treasurer is running out, and I just want to give you notice that come the AGM at the beginning of next year, we will be looking for a new treasurer. The job is easier now because we're on the zero system, and we have a close relationship with Peter Ford, the accountant in Takapuna, so the job is much easier than it was 12 months ago. So if you know anybody who might be good to have on the committee in that sort of way, just think about that, give them a nudge. So that's two things. There's something else I've got to try and remember what the heck it is. We do want to say that the admirable Tracey Barnett, who is chairing the panel tonight, would like to give you a big vote of thanks, Tracey, because when it was suggested that she might chair this concept, she took it and she has done it all herself. It's been a great example to everybody on how to get this thing running. So a big thank you to Tracey. And the other thing is that Jan Mason was going to say that she thought this story showed just where we were up to in the subject that we're going to talk about tonight. Her grandson, who's a very nice, intelligent boy, he's still a little bit above the ankle biter stage, but maybe a knee biter instead. I had a very nice conversation with him the other day, and he was just talking to his father and getting his father to paint his toenails. So that meant that they had to negotiate a thing or two. What colour do you want them to be? To which he looked with all the scorn that a young man can raise. He said, blue, I'm a boy. Thank you, Tracey.
Over there. Good evening, everybody. Can you hear me okay? Yep. Got to make sure we hear everybody okay. So a couple of months ago, I was presenting at a conference, and the conference was for young women. It was women who were year 13, and there were quite a few that were university age as well. And our prime minister was the keynote speaker. And she did something, I told a story that I thought was really telling for this evening. She talked about her mentor, Helen Clark. And she said that she remembers a story that Helen Clark had told her, which was that Helen Clark had just lost the prime ministership after 9 years. And she got a phone call from someone at the UN that was offering her potentially the number 3 position at the United Nations. And there was a pause for a minute, and Helen Clark replied, "But I have no experience in X, Y, Z," and she went on. And there was a long pause at the end of her comment, at the end of the line. And the gentleman from the UN said, "But you ran a country for 9 years." What was so moving to me were the questions, mostly from high school and young school leavers, that followed for Jacinda. How do you handle all the haters, they asked. How do you get more confident? I'm sure I'm not good enough, but I'd love to be a leader. They were all those kind of imposter syndrome questions. And what really struck me, what I think is really important here, is that I'm not sure that the same audience of young men would have asked the same questions. So at that conference, I did a workshop, and the workshop was called Dream Seeding. It's something that I made up. And the concept was simply this, that when we go to high school now, you'll get a talk about sex education. But is anybody really teaching women how to actually realize their dreams? So how to break it down into small, bite-sized little pieces to get you on the right track to get there. So what did I talk about? I talked about how to negotiate your first salary, how to keep track of the good things you do at work to advocate for your next salary review, how to do informational interviewing to learn about your dream direction, how to find mentors, how to break up goals into tiny little pieces so you can put it in your diary and then decide what you want to accomplish when, right? My God, they looked at me like it was deer in the headlights. And this was totally new information. Look, they'd been told about condoms, but these facts of life that are my generations and your generation's working women have battled with and trial and error, and believe me, there's been a hell of a lot of error from all of us. Why aren't we dishing these up to our daughters too? Why aren't we teaching our daughters the nuts and bolts of the world after school when they get there, so they don't have to fight the same battles that we did? Look, just a generation ago, we were once somebody else's professional shadow, let's be honest. Think about it. What was voice recognition 40 years ago? Women. Thousands of women sat in front of a man and wrote down his words en masse. It was called dictation. Who were our first computers? Women, actual women. When Ada Lovelace wrote the first computer program, get the date, 1842 is when she wrote it. She was known as, quote, the enchantress of numbers. But most of us don't even know her name. How do we teach our daughters to use their voices in every realm of their lives? Sure, the women up here that I'm about to introduce have double and triple education degrees these days. But where have we left our daughters? What are they facing right now? Well, let's stop for a second, and I'll let numbers tell the story. Let's imagine, and I believe someone just took a count, that there's about 100 of us here tonight. But let's imagine that we're all women, okay? Men, you're women now for the year. Got it?
Yes.
You will wake up tomorrow, and you'll go to work. The only problem is, as of last Thursday, all of us women are working for free. That's right. As women, with our current gender pay gap, our male colleagues will continue to get paid until the end of the year, but we won't. That's what the gender pay penalty really looks like, what it really means. And hey, look, in New Zealand, we're the lucky ones. The global pay penalty for being a woman is 23%. And what's worse, if you happen to be, say, a lawyer, one of the biggest gaps of any category in New Zealand, your male colleague will be earning about $128,000 to your $66,000. That's a pay penalty of over $61,000. Indeed, in a recent New Zealand survey of 28 job categories, men made more in every single category, except one, shipping and logistics. And you think that it's not comparing apples and apples? Well, it is. But a Ministry of Women study that was published last year showed that 80% of this divide was driven by factors that were hard to measure, including unconscious bias. And even though men and women are now equally represented in the workforce, actually women now graduate in greater numbers than men and actually get higher marks, thank you very much. Still, when a man and a woman engineer both get out of university at the exact same time with the exact same degree, the male new graduate will immediately be offered $5,000 more than his female counterpart. And if you're in high tech, this is a UK stat, but I suspect it's not too far off here in New Zealand, men in tech, this one kills me, are paid more than women for the same job, a staggering 63% of the time. Then, when we try to climb the ladder, this is a New Zealand stat, just 18% of us are landing in top leadership jobs. Maybe that's just business, right? Today, if you're an artist, and 65 to 75 of MFA students are women, yet only about 5% of the artworks of the walls in major museums are women. In fact, in Janssen's History of Western Art, which I'm sure Ros can vouch for, how many women were included in their 1986 edition? 0. We were utterly erased from history books as artists. And in today's edition, now more than 3 decades later, how many women artists are written into history now? Just 9%. You, your daughter, your wife, your granddaughter of this 100 women in the audience tonight, you will have experienced sexual violence, harassment, and abuse. How many of those of us, of the 100? 82 of us. 2/3 of those experienced the abuse as physical aggression too. That means only 18 out of the 100 of us got off free. And finally, when we get home from work at night, even though we are in the workplace in equal numbers now, as a woman, you are still doing 3 times as much domestic work, unpaid, than your male partner. That is, remember, having worked in a job this week that isn't paying you either because of the gender wage gap. So here's our question tonight. How can we arm our daughters to do better, to stand on the shoulders of our wins and steer clear of our losses? Don't despair. We have about an hour and a bit to completely solve this. These 4 incredible women will sort everything out for us, I swear. I am proud, proud, proud to say the stellar panel of accomplished Devonport women are our very own. We begin tonight with remarks from Tessa Duder. Tessa has published more than 40 works of fiction and nonfiction, plays, and anthologies. Recent books include biographies of Margaret Mahy, Sir Peter Blake, and Auckland's First Lady, Sarah Matthew. She is the winner of the Storylines Margaret Mahy Medal, the Catherine Mansfield Fellowship, and an Artist to Antarctica Award. She received an honorary doctorate from the University of Waikato in 2008. What you might not mention is that she also won the silver medal in swimming in the butterfly in 1958 Commonwealth Games and was named Swimmer of the Year in 1959. The popular Alex Quartet quartet novels built upon her own competitive swimming childhood. The series won 3 New Zealand Children's Book of the Year awards and 3 Esther Glenn medals, became a film, and is now translated into 5 languages. In 1994, she was awarded the OBE for services to young people and literature. Please welcome the very honored, we're very honored to have her, our very own Tessa Duder.
Well, thank you for the invitation, Tracey, to be part of this evening. The theme that we were given is what we aren't telling our daughters, and I think Tracey has set the tone of the evening very magnificently. But when I first read this, I thought, God, this is a cunning, even quite a tricky subject that initially induced in me slight feelings of guilt and defensiveness. Are we withholding stuff from our daughters, and if so, why? Okay. You hearing me all right at the back?
No.
No? Okay, I'll speak close, right.
Let me just warn you, this is a bit wobbly.
That's all right. That's all right. So I found myself asking, why do we need to tell them anything? Seems to me today's young women are bombarded day and night via their cell phones, their social media, blogs, YouTube, television and printed media, with advice on every topic under the sun. How to have good sex and better relationships. The dangers of drugs, alcohol, smoking and obesity. How to avoid dementia in 50 years' time by running marathons. How to eat healthily, food now being more chemistry than pleasure. Vanquish sugar, dairy, gluten, red meat. Eat nuts and superfoods like broccoli. Everywhere, experts with PhDs are selling them something. Talking up the latest diets, fashions, surgeries for a bigger butt or fatter lips. So many choices. No wonder we keep reading about young women who are chronically anxious. Since the 1980s, we've heard the mantra, girls can do anything. I did a Google search to see who was the author of this statement, and it seems to have come from a Barbie campaign in the 1980s. Now, going back to the 1950s, my contemporaries mostly became secretaries, nurses, teachers, workers in retail or factories. We expected to marry by the age of 23 and live happily ever after. But in the 1970s, second wave feminism came along, and young women became firefighters, corporate directors, CEOs, airline pilots, bus drivers, research scientists, engineers, architects, ships captains, serious composers, conductors, war correspondents, film directors and prime ministers. Also, they became protesters and whistleblowers on the rich and famous, be they presidents, film directors or actors. It was a bit of a struggle, but in the 21st century, girls can have it all. Even be a prime minister and a devoted new mother at the same time. Well, I'm the oldest body here tonight, and I must nail my political colours to the mast. I can well recall the days before the 1980s, when I was in my 40s, when the doctrine of neoliberalism took hold, and socialism became a dirty word. In that decade world, although interestingly enough, not the Scandinavian countries, embraced the theories of those high priests of economics, the Austrian Friedrich Hayek, Scotsman Adam Smith, and the Americans Gary Becker, Milton Friedman, and the Chicago School. Politicians like Ronald Reagan, Margaret Thatcher, Alan Greenspan, Roger Douglas, Ruth Richardson, and John Key enthusiastically put their theories into practice. Put simply, pure neoliberalism proposes that individuals and businesses operate principally for profit, not to provide a service or play a useful role in a community or the society. Margaret Thatcher famously said there is no such thing as society. So our corporate stakeholders, and God, I hate that word, can easily become more important than their customers or the service they provide. It means cutting taxes, but especially for the rich. Deregulation wherever possible, austerity for public services like transport, hospitals and schools. Market forces, free trade, privatisation, accountabilities, good.
Rubbish.
Public ownership of essentials like energy, transport and water, bad. Any attempt to regulate, for example, opening times in bars or liquor and junk food advertising on television provokes cries of nanny state, tut tut. So neoliberal policies are why we have a huge gap worldwide between the mega rich and the best of us. Crippling student loans instead of free tertiary education that existed until 1992. Offshore banks making enormous profits, an uncontrolled housing market. Why the deliberate reduction of regulatory agencies resulted in leaky homes, collapsing buildings and exploding mines. Are we telling our daughters and granddaughters who are growing up in this regime and know nothing else that it doesn't have to be like this? That they could contribute to gradually winding back the profoundly male doctrine of extreme capitalism for a society that respects female values, encourages civility, initiative, diversity, creativity, empathy, altruism and compassion. And going out to vote, that hard-won right of all females in this country over the age of 18, is the first step on the journey. If you don't vote, I would say to those young women, resign yourself to what is still largely a white man's world. And are we telling them that on their whole life adventure, that maybe one day they will be married or partnered, and according to the stats, they will possibly spend time being single, by choice or rejection. There will be periods when things go wonderfully well, others of heartache, illness, grieving, dealing with difficult children or elderly parents. Their careers might forge ahead or stall. There'll be hard decisions, and yes, they'll make mistakes. Should we be telling them, rather than stand back and wait for some man to come along, that some life skills will be useful? For example, how to back a trailer, change a tyre, tie a bowline, apply for a job, ask for a raise, rent a flat, get a male flatmate to take his turn cleaning the toilet, deal with a bullying boss or a colleague, give first aid, put out a fire. But first and foremost, we should be giving them the know-how to manage their money, so they're financially independent, whether within a marriage or a partnership, whether they're living singly or just out of school or as a widow. Money means choices and inspires self-confidence. My 3 middle-aged daughters, 2 of them mothers, all voted, being capable with money as the knowledge modern young women most need. And here's this thought just to finish. When writing the story of your life, don't let anyone else hold the pen.
Ros Evans has been researching, managing, and reimagining world-class museums for over 25 years, including Te Papa, Museum of New Zealand, the Australian War Memorial Museum, the Australian Museum, and the British Museum. Today, she is the principal director of Object Lab, her own consultancy established in 2012. She specializes in Maori and Pacific Tonga and is often invited to speak internationally, most recently at Bard Graduate Center and Queen's University in New York. Her work has been featured at the Egyptian and Oriental collections at the British Museum as well. She received a Getty Fellowship in 2002 and was the winner of a Winston Churchill Fellowship in 2009. We may know her more famously as the curator for the Navy Museum, project manager for exhibits redevelopment. And yes, Ros, we do want war stories. Please welcome our very own internationally renowned Ros Evans.
Well, Tessa, I'm with you, sister. Thank you very much for asking me to come along. And I'll just start by saying, ko Ros, ko te asi awa, tuku ingoa, ko, gosh, I'm a little bit nervous tonight. We tako ngā tata teo tuku tutunga. Sorry about that. Ko Ros Evans tuku ingoa. Ka mihi nui kia koutou a tēnā pō. He mihi ana, tēnā koutou, kia ora koutou katoa.
Kia ora.
That's just my little mihi. And I thought tonight, I was thinking about what Tracey had asked, and it was a little bit of a difficult one, because I have a daughter, and I would call her a bit of a know-it-all. And many times I'm completely open to being able to say anything to her, give her any advice, but she's not at all interested. So, in fact, that's what gave me the line tonight. That's where I'm going, because it's all about role models. It's all about what you do yourself. And so I'm her role model until she finds someone else. So I thought I'd just go into my background, because I feel as if the way I've gone has been my grappling with essentially the male world. And my upbringing was rather unorthodox. I had mixed ethnicity. My mother's Māori French and my father is Welsh. Both of them indicated that they were subjugated cultures. They would always tell us that, and that they were colonised. So, that gives you the idea of what the sort of house we were in. But to complicate matters more, my mother decided that we should all go to single-sex schools, which was a nightmare. And so 5 girls and 1 boy, we all went off to Marsden Collegiate School. And I spent most of my time in total rebellion. But what I want to say is that I was surrounded from the age of 5 with oil paintings around me of women founders, by teachers who were all women. There was not one man except for a rather quiet quiet music teacher, and we made his life a misery. That was it. So essentially I was brought up in this environment, a very female-oriented environment at home and a female-orientated environment at school. And our upbringing as well, we were a large family, we were fairly anarchic, and anything could happen. And I was a 60s child, and so I was in Wellington for the 70s, and my mother used to take me on women's marches because I was an asthmatic child. So I was at home a lot, and so she'd have to drag me along. And one time when I was, I think, 7 years old, she was holding my hand, and we were walking up Lambton Quay, and we were coming up, and we were going to run the gauntlet, and we were going to go past Barrett's pub, and it was on Stuart Dawson's corner, and there were women in front of me and all around me, and everyone was chanting, and the drunk men at the side, because they came out for a bit of entertainment, pushed themselves in front of me and beat up the women in front. I could hardly believe it. That was what it was like. It was a wild west in Wellington. And I told my daughter this the other day, and she said, yeah, whatever. I also told her about how you'd go past building sites, and there'd be men with banners, and it'd be 1 to 10. What did they think you were like, And it was running the gauntlet, because they'd be cheering out, they'd say you look like a dog, or you were beautiful, and they'd like to do whatever they wanted to do with you. But honestly, that was what it was like walking around Wellington, because there were a lot of building sites going on. So that was the sort of environment that we were in. It's quite different now, although there are other issues going on, aren't there? So I left school and went to university. I was always interested in science, but I was also interested in the arts. And I thought, well, what am I going to do? I'll do what other people don't. I'll do a conjoint degree, because people didn't do it then, science and arts. Came out, managed to get trained up. I've done a number of degrees. and I worked for 20 years in museums, different museums all over the place. And in every one of them, I've got less pay, I've had less opportunities, I've witnessed and had to be involved in some serious harassment. And I've been in inflexible workplaces. Don't worry, I put up a fight, but you learn to choose your fights. You don't want to get on the backside of management. So I decided after all of that and I thought I'm a pretty strong feminist actually. I was a bit of a dreamer, and I was a supporter of Marge Piercy. I don't know if anyone here has read her, but she was Woman on the Edge of Time. And of course it's all about utopian futures, and I thought I totally believe in that. And I linked that up with a lot of my mother's the environment that she created, which was very much not that she was meaning to be, but it was very much an open household, which was based upon strongly Indigenous perspectives, because she was brought up on the tobacco lands of Motueka on the whenua, with with their urupa down the road and the pā over the road, and so she had a very traditional upbringing. So she was uprooted and went to Wellington as a nurse, and then married a Welshman. What future is that? My God. Anyway, nevertheless, she brought us all up slightly different, and I thought, well, I'm going to mix all of that up, and I'm going to gather all of that information together, and then I'm going to create my own business. I'm going to become independent of men. I'm going to create my own values, and I'm going to pay myself. And I'm going to get out there in that workplace. I'm going to fight for jobs. And so I think that for me is success, because I create what I want. And for me to say I talked to a young girl the other day, and she said to me, how do I get ahead in the world? What do? I said, you get out there, you go and work, you find as many skills as you can, and then you create your own environment. And then I went ahead and told her, you have to have values. You have to have the values that suit you. You have to have goals and drive. You have to have confidence in your abilities. Your abilities might not be the same as other people's, but things like negotiation and listening skills that a lot of women have, most women have, are very, very important. You have to take risks, and risks come with confidence and abilities. I think you have to have humility and compassion. And at university I was lucky enough to be taught by someone called Garth Rogers, and he always drummed into us, the person is the political. So you've got to make the change. Don't worry about anyone else. And for me, my life is about creativity and growth. That's all I want to do. I just want to keep growing. I want to keep being creative. And in the way that I work at the moment, and the business that I own and I direct, I can have all of those. So I think that the future is, for me, the female future. Let those men sort out what they're doing. You just go ahead and you create it yourself. And that's hopefully what I've done, and that's what I'm doing. And who knows what I'll do in 5 years, because I'm going to transform and morph into something else that suits me. Right. So that's my advice to young girls these days. Just get out there and have confidence in yourself, but make sure you've got a goal out there that you want to get to, because otherwise you just won't. So thank you very much.
Thank you, Ros. That was wonderful. Augustine Morgan-Guthrie is an art historian in training, about to complete her undergraduate degree this year at the University of Auckland, moving on to her honors degree in March of 2019. Before that, you may have read about her copious times in the Flagstaff for numerous prizes at Takapuna Grammar, including first in art history, deputy head girl. The actual list is quite long. She was the academic winner of a full scholarship at Auckland University and also studied at the University of Stockholm, obtaining what she calls the fearful title of one of the top graduates of her cohort in art history there too, where she says modestly, quote, "It helps to be surrounded by an incredibly formidable department of scholars." Augustine is hoping to move into curation and freelance writing work and has a fair bit to say on the topic of women, having been raised, and I quote, "in a beautiful, varied, open, female-driven family." Please welcome Augustine Morgan-Guthrie.
Thank you. My knees are shaking. So it was actually really nice to hear Ros speak because I feel like... Sorry, can you hear me? I'm too tall for it. Is that better? A little bit?
Need to raise.
I'll raise my voice as well.
Hold up the mic.
Okay.
That's
Is that better?
Yeah.
Okay. Cool. So I was saying it's really nice to hear Ros talk because I guess I'm at the start of what I hope is going to be a career like hers, and it's interesting having. I'm on a big summer break right now. I don't start my honours degree until March next year. And trying to find jobs and going around, and I felt like the most successful way I've been doing that is by creating roles. And so I thought what she said was quite interesting about having to go and do that and just be confident in whatever you're able to do. But I kind of thought I'd approach this night in two ways. One through my degree, and then one through just my personal experience of being a young woman. So in terms of my degree, it was the classic line in any first year essay I wrote, to lead the charge with "art reflects society," which was the thing to impress my marker. Obviously in this is an inherent truth, but I think more so as a young woman, keenly interested in what we're talking about tonight, I've used my degree in art history as a way also to track oppression and female experience and who's been included and who hasn't been included in the histories. And this is why it kind of just has hooked me, and this is why I continue to read and study this. It's just incredible. But I guess I veer more towards studying contemporary art because you can recognise more obvious kind of rebellion, revolution, subversion of a traditionally male sphere. In saying that, the art department at Auckland Uni, which is pretty much 50-50 male-female professors, have somehow managed to work in a discussion of female art practice in almost every course I have taken in my undergraduate. Whether it be 15th century Baroque art and female monarchs using artwork to articulate power, or Polynesian artists and their traditional female craft practices communicating heritage. So it's the degree that keeps on giving for me in terms of the experience of womanhood. And I really enjoy learning about the artists who have in some way disrupted this male writing of histories. So that's kind of my take on my degree. And then in terms of my personal experience, I was raised in Devonport and I went to a really great high school who got me, right into what I like. And myself and Tracey's son Piers, we were both in a really great peer sexuality support program where we were kind of peer mentors to the rest of our cohort. And it was a really formative time for us, and it was just the most incredible opportunity. But in terms of the health classes that were part of the curriculum at high school, in hindsight, I've noticed so many gaps, and I was educated in certain things, but I noticed that, a lot of my peers wouldn't have been. And the problem is with these classes, they're the only time that, it's the only opportunity to be taught and learn these issues before you're sent out into the world. It's the only time it will be like a condensed delivery of knowledge of how to respect women, how consent, how to have, respectful sex and birth control and all these things. It's the only time that will happen unless you actively choose to pursue it in your tertiary studies. So I was kind of thinking about that in hindsight for tonight. And these classes at high school have gotten very good at teaching fairly traditional notions of sexuality and gender and relationships. And I think that's great. But in terms of talking about womanhood, I wanted to address how these health classes and people in general hardly talk about, or they squeam away from actually talking about sex and consent and why we do it and the personal act of it. And I think there's a huge discrepancy in talking about what good, happy and healthy sex can look like. We talk about STIs, we talk about how to prevent pregnancies, about how to listen when a woman says no. But what I think this does inherently is it makes the woman more vulnerable when entering the bedroom for the first time. And it did for me too. And there are all these anxieties placed on us. The knowledge that almost all birth control options are relegated to the female domain, that most assaults happen to women, that most pleasure in sex is guaranteed to be achieved by the male. And we spend our whole lives trying to figure out how to get there ourselves. What does this do to our collective psyche, I wonder? Are girls taught to be controllers of male sexuality rather than their own? And in terms of teaching consent too, it is common knowledge that just saying no doesn't cut it. And there are way too many grey areas in that. So perhaps we need to try teaching young people what hearing yes sounds like too. You know, an enthusiastic yes is what you should be looking for. I know it can sound like an absurd thing to encourage youngsters to think about sex in a pleasurable light. They might go out and do more of it. But I think that happens anyway. And I also think that so many anxieties for women are rooted in this one-sided, daunting knowledge that sex is something to be warned off. And it's a scary thing. And what we're taught in high school doesn't really set us up properly, I feel. And hopefully we'll talk more about that tonight, but I don't want to go over my time limit. So that's all I got to say. Thank you.
Thank you,
Second
Augustine.
round.
Michelle Leggett is regarded here and abroad as one of New Zealand's leading poets and poetry scholars. She became New Zealand's first inaugural poet laureate in 2007 to 2009. She was the winner of the Prime Minister's Award for Poetry in 2013. And in a Harvard book on 100 world poets from before Shakespeare to now, she features with only one other New Zealand poet, James K. Baxter. She has influenced poetry both here in New Zealand and internationally as a scholar, critic, editor, anthologist, video producer, and prize-winning poetry teacher. She was awarded the New Zealand Order of Merit in 2009 and awarded as Services to Poetry. In 2017, she was the first woman poet and scholar to be elected as a Fellow of the Royal Society of New Zealand. We are very honored to have Michelle Leggett here with us this evening.
Bravo.
Here. And you're going to be standing. You're good. Oops, hold on. You move your legs. You're standing closer right next to me, and the mic is
Right there. Somebody took my glass.
I took the glass, and the mic is right here. And there's a pretty shaky table right in front of you. You got it?
The mic is here.
It needs to be talked to. You want to hold it?
Oh, that might be okay.
Close to
And
you.
right behind you is a chair, so don't go backwards too much.
All right.
There we go. You're in a tight little corner.
Where did Tracey find all that stuff? I sent her something else. It was much briefer, and she went out looking. Well done, Tracey. Top marks for research. Wonderful hearing from the three marvellous women who precede me. I'm the imposter. I don't have a daughter. I have two wonderful sons. I don't have a daughter, and when Tracey set this whole thing up, I thought, well, what can I do here? And I cast my mind back. I cast my mind back looking for a poem, not one of mine, a poem that would have the strongest mother-to-daughter voice that I could think of, because I wanted to bring some poetry here tonight. I did find it. I hope you enjoy it. It's Anne Sexton, and it's called My Little Girl, My String Bean, My Lovely Woman. my string bean, my lovely woman. My daughter at 11, almost 12, is like a garden. Oh, darling, born in that sweet birthday suit, and having owned it and known it for so long, now you must watch high noon enter. Noon, that ghost hour. Oh, funny little girl. This one, under a blueberry sky. This one, how can I say that I've known just what you know and just where you are? It's not a strange place, this odd home, where your face sits in my hand, so full of distance, so full of its immediate fever. The summer has seized you, as when last month in Amalfi I saw lemons as large as your desk-side globe, that miniature map of the world. And I could mention too the market stalls of mushrooms and garlic buds, all engorged. Or I think even of the orchard next door, where the berries are done and the apples are beginning to swell. And once, with our first backyard, I remember I planted an acre of yellow beans we couldn't eat. Oh, little girl, my string bean, how do you grow? You grow this way. You are too many to eat. I hear, as in a dream, the conversation of the old wives speaking of womanhood. I remember that I heard nothing myself. I was alone. I waited like a target. Let high noon enter, the hour of the ghosts. Once the Romans believed that noon was the ghost hour, and I can believe it too, under that startling sun. And someday they will come to you. Someday men bare to the waist, young Romans at noon, where they belong, with ladders and hammers while no one sleeps. But before they enter, I will have said, your bones are lovely, and before their strange hands, there was always this hand that formed. Oh, darling, let your body in. Let it tie you in comfort. What I want to say, Linda, is that women are born twice. If I could have watched you grow as a magical mother might, if I could have seen through my magical, transparent belly, there would have been such ripening within. Your embryo, the seed taking on its own life, clapping the bedpost, thumbs and two mysterious eyes, the awfully human head, the heart jumping like a puppy, the important lungs, the becoming, while it becomes, as it does now, a world of its own, a delicate place. I say hello to such shakes and knockings and hijinks, such music, such sprouts, such dancing mad bears of music, such necessary sugar, such goings on. Oh, little girl, my string bean, how do you grow? You grow this way. You are too many to eat. What I want to say, Linda, is that there is nothing in your body that lies. All that is new is telling the truth. I'm here, that's somebody else, an old tree in the background. Darling, stand still at your door, sure of yourself, a white stone, a good stone, as exceptional as laughter. You will strike fire, that new thing. July 14th, 1964. Thank you.
Hang on to me. Lift your left leg up quite high. Left leg. There we go. You're good. All right, and then walk it down. And one more. There's no. Just take it easy. Actually, yep. Let's make it. Hi, everyone. Hi. Okay, let's read the crowd. How many of you, men or women, consider yourself feminists? Raise of hands.
No, call out. I can't. Thank you. We don't raise hands when there's blind people in the room.
Yes. Thank you. I appreciate that. Thank you. Thank you.
So do you want to ask the question again? Well, let's hear that question again.
Oh, there we
And the
go.
response.
How many of you in the audience consider yourself a feminist? Say yay.
Yay!
How many of you are unsure or don't? Or are just too chicken to say so? So here's the question. Let's start with this. Even though we are proudly well into our third female prime minister, as she was vying for the job, there was a narrative in the media, and I know media, that Jacinda was not experienced enough to take the job. John Key was in Parliament for 7 years before he became Prime Minister. Jacinda had been in Parliament for 9 years. When she became pregnant, and though we can certainly understand the novelty of that, international attention, right? The media ran with the can she do both narrative. Even though Bill English has 6 children, Jacinda only 1, and both have partners who had agreed to take on full-time parenting roles. So I don't know what is more insulting there. Is that to Mary English, who can't handle 6 children, or Clark Gayford, who can't handle 1? So here's the question, ready? Are women leaders panel still being subjected to a different standard? You know that old line, Ginger Rogers did everything Fred Astaire did except backwards and in high heels. Discuss. Ready, set, go, and please do not be polite. Please interrupt each other. Please go for it. Come on, Rose, you've got it there.
That's not fair. You said you weren't going to call us out.
That's not fair. Anybody want to start this one off?
I think it's absolutely obvious that the answer is yes, they are being subjected to different standards. You only have to look at the conversations that erupt every now and again about what a woman politician is wearing. And the jacket, remember the jacket sort of dispute that went on a few years ago? I mean, it was so boring that this should be suddenly, the media is making it front page news. And why? They wouldn't do it for a man, because they're all wearing very boring suits or red ties, which we would prefer not to be seeing every single day of our life. So I don't think there's any doubt about it at all. They are subjected to completely different standards of dress and general appearance. It's very important for a female politician.
Michelle, are you thinking?
Yeah, I'm wondering if Fred Astaire ever got to wear the high heels. Really? Come on. That's such a great image. Ginger in the high heels, pushing, going backwards, but who's in charge? Ginger in the high heels. But I'd love to see Fred in high heels, going backwards.
I find it interesting, this whole, if you're a mother, that's your sole job and that's all you can manage to achieve, which is in itself, enough. But for a woman to work and be a mother is groundbreaking, and it is. But it's also assumed that she won't do her job as well. And I'm just thinking about Jacinda and her being able to do that. And then also, lecturers in my, people who teach me at university, and one of my lecturers has her kids come along on Wednesdays because her husband is busy and can't look after them. So they sit in the front row and they do their thing, and I watch it unfold. She's lecturing, a theatre of 100 students, and her kids are there, and she's multitasking, and it's a beautiful thing to watch. And she has an open invite to any mature students who come along and bring their kids. And I think about it in that sense, it is possible to do both, and there should be no critique. And it's a personal effort. And if you feel capable, then you should be allowed to.
You know, the irony of that is how many generations have we been taught by male professors who never brought along their children?
Exactly, and we're
They obviously deserve that same
Yes,
right.
for sure.
Well, I worked all the way up until I had patients, until I had my daughter. I worked up until a week before I had her, and no one seemed to complain that I wasn't doing my job. It was after I had her that I got the problems. You
How so? What happened?
Because she was visible.
Because she was visible.
Yeah.
She was out of my
She was on the
stomach.
outside.
And I mean, I thought I could put her in a papoose and put her under my desk, but that wasn't the case. Never is.
Yeah.
But, you know, environments need to be flexible enough to offer you the ability to share jobs and have creches on site. That's what I'm mad about.
That there's not enough of
There's
them.
not enough of that,
Absolutely.
you know.
Right. Well, you know, here's a great quote by our very own Dame Anne Salmon. If women have to act like men to lead, that's the ultimate defeat. Which begs the question, you are all leaders and emerging leaders in your field. Are we leading differently than men, or being taught to revere or simply mimic the male style of leadership? What do you think?
I did read a comment the other day that somebody was being very critical of Sheryl Sandberg, whose book was called Lean In. And this particular writer is saying, actually, that's nonsense. What are you leaning into? You're leaning into the male world, the corporate boardroom, which is probably 90% male. And she is telling all the women to cope with it by leaning in and being part of the conversation. But the conversation itself is what needs to be changed. In my case, as I've probably gone on to enough tonight about, is this world of extreme capitalism that we are living in. And until that changes, the two things have to happen. Then we'll get some traction, some real traction on the feminist position in society.
Yeah, we have to create our own new reality, I think. And in traditional environments that are very male-led, you know, businesses, law firms, economic firms, you know, the whole thing, they're very adversarial and they're not very supportive, and particularly to women. And boardrooms, because I've been in enough of those, they're very frightening places. They've got their own language. So, you know, we have to change these things.
Well, anybody got an example of your leadership style that was different than a man's, or just a man's leadership style that was just glaringly not on by a woman's standards?
Well, I try and work on a consensual basis. And
What
so,
a concept.
Well, and particularly when I'm working with communities, I work and gather all of the information together. Everyone needs to talk it through and agree. That's something that's not necessarily commonplace. It's a lot more satisfying, but it's a lot more difficult. And so when you start putting in the profit angle, when you have to make profit, you're always trying to get from A to B as fast as you can. So that whole consensual information gathering, conversation, etc., collaboration just doesn't happen, you see. So as you were saying, Tessa, the profit-driven model just isn't working. We need to change that. Well, you know, of course the world might not even survive in 10 years, so we do have to change it.
Yes. Michelle, you have a way in on this one?
Yeah, kindness, gentleness. The way, just in running meetings, listening. I was sitting in, was it a staff meeting? I don't even remember. It was a planning meeting, a planning day meeting, and we were being asked in that way that planning meetings go, to kind of put on the table the things that we thought were most important to our discipline. I work in an English department, and lots of things were put on that table. And I remember saying, listening, and everybody went, what? I said, we should listen to our students. We should listen to each other, that's a given, and we'll fight as well. But we should listen to our students over and over again. They're not clients, okay? They're our students. They're the people that have come to the university because we're their role models. We should be supplying that kind of role model. If I've got one, to me it's devastatingly simple. How would I like to be treated like that? The do as you would be done by thing, okay? Yeah. And I've always hoped that I'm a senior person in that place now, but I have never ever forgotten what it was like to be a junior person and what it was like to be a student on the first day. And I remember it was utterly terrifying. And then after a while it wasn't, and it was because of the kinds of people that Augustine's talking about, those fantastic teachers that I would hope that everybody in this room could name a fantastic teacher. And I'm very proud to be a teacher. I love being a poet, I'm proud of being a poet, but my day job is as a teacher, and I'm really lucky because I get to teach poetry. I get the best of both worlds. But I hope I never, ever forget what it's like to be on the other side of that power divide. That's me.
That's all right. I wrote down a quote that I loved by Adrienne Rich, which you might appreciate, especially Michelle. There must be those among us whom we can sit down and weep and still be regarded as warriors. I love that one.
Can I jump in there?
Yeah.
Speaking of weeping.
Go for it.
Several of you have probably in the last few days noticed that I'm driving a new dog. It's all right, Oliver's still there. Olive, the beautiful golden retriever, is now the retired guide dog at our place and is getting on really well, completely unjealous of the new guide dog. But new guide dogs are not simple things. And I'm going to say, I thought, 8 years with Olive, this will be a pushover. And when you guys see me out there on the streets of Devonport, stopped at the curb with the little black dog in harness, saying, "Forward, Beth." And Beth looking at me going, "I'm not doing that." Please don't come and intervene. I'll have an earpiece, okay, there's a trainer nearby. And we are, Beth and I are getting to understand each other. It's a slow process, and twice last week I was in tears. And we don't know whether it's going to work, okay? This is pre-allocation. It means, this is the testing period. So my heart is in my mouth, and the tears are in my eyes. But that was Friday. Okay, this is now we've done Monday, Tuesday and Wednesday, and there've been no more tears. Right, we're just getting on with it. If it works, there'll be a little black dog. If it doesn't, there'll be another dog sometime. Anyway, tears are good. I was just full of tension and stress, and so was the dog, and I just dissolved on a corner, and the trainers came up to me and said, "There, it's all right. They're great." That's my war story.
Yeah. Let's hear it for softness and appreciation of it. Well, here's another one. Let's get into the down and dirty kind of for a second, which is, does anybody remember, did anyone ever see the movie 3 Billboards? Yeah. With Frances McDormand? Yeah. She won an Oscar for it, and she's quite the character. And when she got her Oscar, she stood up on her speech after she gave her thanks yous, and she said, "I'd like every female," she was pretty hyped up, "I would like every female nominee in every category to please stand up." And then in the front row was Meryl Streep, and she said, Meryl, if you stand up, everybody else will." And you saw a scattering of people. There aren't many women. I mean, we have an actress category, but outside of that, I was in film production for 15, 20 years. There's not a whole lot of women in the industry, still. And she said, that everyone started to applaud the women that had stood up. And she said, "I will leave you with 2 words tonight. Inclusion rider." I don't know about you, but I went immediately to Google. I was like, what the hell is an inclusion rider? Ready? If you are a powerful woman in Hollywood today, if you are an actress, a director, there's not many of them, a producer, if you are really making a lot of money and a lot of BO in the box office, you can ask for an inclusion rider, meaning that you can ask for women in your crew, you can ask for LGBTQI people in your crew, you can ask for people with disabilities in your crew, percentages if you want. You can call the shots to forcibly put the people who you work with in the places that you want to see them in. So, we talk about this word. Here's another one for those of you, maybe for the older people in the, well, no, I won't be ageist about this. The word intersectionality, which is, for example, I'm a woman, I'm also a Jewish woman. Each of us have many diversities. But are women leading the charge here? Is this how we change institutional privilege? What's your take, folks?
Well, I'll bring it back to kind of the curriculum that I study, and I think it's being changed by the people who are employed by the university, and then they create these courses. And for example, I just took one that's called The Art of Gender Politics, and it went through not necessarily like the histories of art, but just certain points where we could kind of knuckle down and just study that. And it was completely intersectional, and I guess it's because my professor, Narino Ellis, is Maori, but she took it right across the globe. We were studying Native American tapestries, we were studying Māori art, we were studying European settlers, and it was completely varied. And she created it. She wrote that syllabus, she got it approved, she brought it into the institution, and she taught 100 people that. And the attendance for those lectures was through the roof. And when I went and met with her for her to kind of check over my essay, she said to me, generally people studying either art history or doing this as like their arts paper, and they might be studying law, we get a lot of crossovers from law, generally people become the most passionate about these courses, the ones where it's across the globe, it's got a lot of Indigenous interest in it, and it can be like a 90% Pākehā audience. And I know for me, those are the essays that have the most passion, they have the most kind of my voice in it as well. And I think it's just admirable that they kind of manage to work all of that into the system and it filters through. And then eventually, one day I might try and teach the same kind of thing or carry it on.
They're modeling it for you.
Yeah, totally.
And I would say the same things happened in my discipline, in English. It's the same desire on the part of the people who are now teaching to not teach the way that we were taught, or what we were taught 30 or 40 years ago, and to teach that wide intersectional stuff. It's really important. What you don't know is really important. Go and find it.
Well, for me, 20 years ago, just about coming up 20 years ago, Te Papa was opened, right? And Cheryl Sutherland, who's a Devonport person, and also my pretty much my heroine and mentor, she went about and developed Te Papa. Now, part of the basis of Te Papa was that it had to generate its own funds, or 50% of its funds, which was extraordinary at the time. So she had to come up with a way, and a real strategist, to get everyone in. Now the reality was, is she thought, okay, I'm going to start and I'm going to create an institution that employs the New Zealand population, representative of the New Zealand population, and I'm going to have exhibitions that represent the New Zealand population. And then I'm going to have to, because the government required it, I'm going to get the representative of the New Zealand population in my door. So that's gender, age, whatever, everything. And it happened. And she did it. And it's extraordinary. She did positive recruitment of specifically Māori, Pacifica, male and female as equal gender She did the whole thing. And
She
even
created her own
she
inclusion
created-
rider.
Yeah, absolutely, and it worked. And now she's responsible, 20 years later, well, a very successful, internationally, wildly successful institution. It may have gone a little bit to the side now, but nevertheless, at the time it was radical, internationally radical. And she actually successfully got those numbers through the door. And how's that, eh? Those people are all out there now, and I'm one of them.
Fantastic. Fantastic.
So it does work. Oh, and it was bicultural, by the way. Just wanted to say that. Most importantly, it was a bicultural flat structure, which is pretty cool.
Yeah, it's really interesting to hear, in academia and the world of museums, because I think in publishing I've been quite lucky with my timing, because probably a lot of you here know that in the 1930s and 40s, New Zealand literature was dominated by the likes of A.R.D. Fairbairn and Dennis Glover and James K. Baxter, and it was very much a boys' club. And when I started getting published in 1982, I think what's happened since then is that publishing is actually very strong on women's input and women's initiatives. And when I think of the editors I've had, Wendy Harricks at Oxford University Press, Anne French at Oxford University Press, the lovely Bernie Speechman at Penguin, Lorraine Day at HarperCollins, and now we've got real trailblazers like Julia Marshall at Gecko, who's doing some extraordinary publishing of children's books, and Nicola Leggott, who likewise at Massey University Press, and women have become a very strong voice in publishing. And when you think of the great authors of New Zealand literature, you first think, of course, of Catherine Mansfield, and then you think of Janet Frame, and then you think of Margaret Mahy, and those are the big three. But then you start to think of people like Eleanor Catton, and a whole group of younger writers coming through, which is absolutely wonderful.
I think marvelous.
Yeah, actually. So I think that publishing is one area where women have made a real breakthrough, in a sense, not only at the editorial level, but also at the executive level. They're deciding what books to publish and whether they're going to spend $50,000 on a new book by an illustrated book, which will be very, very expensive to produce. So I think I've been lucky to have worked in an area which is where the female voice is very strong.
Well, one thing that links all five of us together is Devonport. All of the people sitting I suspect most of the people sitting in this room is Devonport. And for Augustine and my kids, I know they refer to it as the bubble. And in truth, in many ways, it is. We're a homogenous group. We're mostly Pakeha. Look, the biggest controversies that we see in our local newspaper are usually bike lanes and dog poop.
The dog poop thing's important.
How did growing up here, and I use the word very specifically, growing up here, whether from childhood, like Augustine, or as a young or middle womanhood, how did that influence you as a woman? And you all have to answer this. Dun, dun, dun.
Well, I'm not starting.
Come on, Michelle.
All right. I was explaining this to Augustine before. Mark and I came to Devonport first in 1979, and we rented the front of the Perrier's villa at 11 St Albans Street, which is now the McRae's place. And Peter Perrier died this morning. The notice was in the paper this morning, which brought this all back. And for $30 a week, we had the best views in Devonport.
$30 a week.
Our toilet looked out across Rangitoto Channel. It was great. Then we went off to Canada for 5 years while I did my doctorate. And I arrived home with, the PhD under one arm and an 8-month-old baby under the other. And all we could think about, we were sad at having to come home. We couldn't call it home, we called it coming back, because we'd had such a great time in Canada. It was wonderful. And we only gradually fitted ourselves back here into New Zealand. And my parents had died while I was overseas. But the place that made it possible, I'm going to say, was Devonport. Maybe we're people of very little imagination. When we thought about where we wanted to live when we came back with our 8-month-old baby, Mark got a job at the Herald, and he's still got it. I got a job tutoring at the university, which that evolved into what I'm now doing. And we thought about Devonport as the place where we wanted to be. All those years in Canada, the place we did love, the place we, neither of us is from here, but the place we wanted to come back to was here. And we were lucky. We were exceptionally fortunate to buy the little tumble-down cottage in Domain Street, which is still wearing the same coat of paint it had just had put on in 1986 when they sold it to us. And for me, it's been, it's a wonderful place to bring up children. I'm not kidding. And of course, over the years, when we found out what was happening with my eyesight, it became even more important because I'm now walking around in a place that I can't see. But of course I can see it because it's all right up here. Okay, you're all still young and beautiful, of course. I haven't been able to see anybody properly. But the point I'm making is it's much easier to deal with something like the loss of sight or some big horrible thing that might happen to you. To be in a place that is a home place, to be in a place where I've walked around these streets pushing a stroller, with bikes, kids on bikes, driving kids to school when I could still drive. And there's a whole kind of lifetime of tracks around here. When I'm walking with the dog, I'm not allowed to, when I'm driving the dog, I can't daydream as much as I used to when I used to walk around and I had my sight, because it's rather dangerous. It's a bit like driving a car. You must concentrate on that dog. But I can, in one part of my head, I'm walking these streets and I'm, the sun is out or the hail is coming down as it was today. I'm in this place that I know very well, and it's a great comfort when I have to go to places that I don't know and when I have to do things that I'm not sure about. I feel as if I've got a base. And it's a base that's, let me say, only 32 years old. Many people here have been here much longer than that. But it is a place to come back to. And anytime we're away and we come home, it is now home, okay? We're back, but we're home. So that's my Devonport. It's many Devonports. It's all the Devonports of the last 32 years, and then some. And then, my kids come back home and keep adding to those roots, if you like. Roots meaning R-O-U-T-E-S. Tracks, because I'm a walker. And I'm a walker because I'm a poet. Poets walk. That's how we get our rhythms. Most of my writing, if I've got a problem, I get out and I walk it. The dog is there, so I can do it. It's a great place. We're very, very fortunate. And I can always picture the Pohutukawa coming out. Okay, Mark's just told me, they're out again. So I just paint them in my head. I just paint them all there. They're there. It's good.
What a lovely image.
Okay, I'll go.
Yeah, because you're real.
So obviously I grew up here, and my parents moved my sister and I here when I don't even know how old I was, but it's kind of all I really remember in terms of growing up in a really, what we call the bubble, and that essentially means very sheltered and very safe. And I think more so now my family have moved out of Devonport only last year, and I live in town. Even coming back here, I feel a deep sense of nostalgia, but also just like, for example, living overseas last year and just living in town, I've had to be much more aware of outside threats and just how it is to live as a woman in this world. I feel like I'm stating the obvious, but we are very lucky to be able to, walk down the street at 10 p.m. walking home from the Vic after seeing a movie with my sister and not feel threatened or scared or like I'm being followed
And that's what I'm saying. For a person without eyes, it is security, and there's a lot to be said for, if only everywhere was as secure. If this kind of feeling of security could be extended, that's what we want.
Especially as a woman.
And walk through the park at night.
Yeah.
Why not?
Exactly. I mean, I remember I was living alone in Stockholm last year, and Mum called me and she said, where are you? And I said, I'm out. She said, how are you getting home? And I fibbed and said, I've got a friend walking me home. And I didn't, and she found out because she's Mum. She's like, you can't do that. You don't live in Devonport anymore. You can't walk across through a park and a shortcut at 12 a.m. and think that it's okay. And it's true. You do have some close brushes, and catching like the metro at night and stuff. I guess here everyone knows everyone. It's a small community, and it's beautiful. And the older I get, the more I think, I honestly couldn't picture like raising kids anywhere safer or more beautiful. And so it's hard to kind of reconcile that. It's pretty special, but it's not really reality as well for the rest of the world.
I suppose I've found out over the years that I'm a North Shore person, and I've lived in Hauraki, and I've lived in Milford, and at present I'm at Castor Bay, and I've only lived in Devonport for a couple of years. But I think I perhaps would like to say that the name of Duda
goes back a
very long way to the 1840s.
You've got a street named after you.
And for that I have to thank my ex-husband John, who has a very strong sense of history and a very strong sense of family. And through him, I developed an identity with his family, which I didn't have with my own, with my own descendants who are Italian, French, Irish and English. Wow. And I don't think I would have written the book that I went to Livorno in Tuscany to write about how my great-grandparents got here in 1875. I felt I needed to write that book to balance up the strength of the family stories and the family tree and the identity that the family has in Devonport. And I've always been very grateful to John for that, because for him it's not something he's learned, it's something that he's had since childhood. And the whole family, particularly some of you may remember Marian Fulsome. Does that name ring any bells anywhere? Well, she was John's aunt, and she was one of these passionate genealogists. And she created family trees, and she wrote a whole book in 1991, which I helped her to edit, about the family that is descended from Thomas Duda and his wife, who were here in 1840. They were among the very earliest settlers on the North Shore. So I just feel that I've been very lucky to have absorbed John's family, and when I count that as a huge strength, that I've been shown the way, actually, how to create a family identity within a small community. And I'm living in Castor Bay at the moment, but when my time there is done, I would dearly love to come back and live in Devonport. I really would, because I always feel, even those 2 years that I had here, I always feel that I'm coming home, actually. So it'll happen one day.
Tessa, we did a big renovation in a house about a year ago, and there were a bunch of Duder bricks that we were about, and I said they were about to biff them all, and I said, no, I want them. Yeah. And the ones that have Duder stamped on them are now still lined up in our back garden. Yeah. I can't bear to leave that history behind.
Yeah, well, those twins, Richard and Robert, were great identities of Devonport in the early part of the 19th century. And I have this wonderful vision of the 5 daughters of Robert, was it, Lisa? Robert and Richard. The 5 daughters galloping down Cheltenham Beach. And I can just see these girls sort of with their hair flying out and They must have had a wonderful life.
Fantastic.
Yeah. Yeah.
So there are lots of stories there which we put in the book and which are just part of our family history. Yeah.
I came here, I think it's 13 years ago, lucky for some, as my father would say. Stupid jokes. And I remember when I came here and, when actually, as I was leaving, before I left Wellington, obviously I was at work and I was pretending that I wasn't pregnant, as you did, because, so frightened.
As you do.
Would put your job in peril. And I got up to the 5th month and people were just thinking I was getting a bit tubby and didn't want to say anything. And then finally got out and everyone kept coming up to me and saying, "What are you going to do? Oh, what are you going to do about it?" And I said, "Well, I'm going to have it." I've got much choice. And they went, "Ah!" And then it was horror. Went round to Papa. Oh, horrible. Poor Rose. She's going to ruin her career.
They didn't say that.
They were, actually, because no one really had any kids. And so I had patients, very difficult to keep going. Nevertheless, decided to make a change and come to this beautiful environment in Devonport. And I get up here and I find that the play schools or whatever they're called, they only went for like 2 or 3 hours. I thought, bloody hell, how am I going to work? And this is just terrible. What sort of place is this? And then I started, I went around all these different places where I could put patients because, I just simply wasn't used to having her every day and not working because I was really agitated. And these women would say to me, "So how many have you got?" And I'd go, "Oh, I've got one." Just the one. Just the one. And then I kept thinking, God, I've got just one. I've got just one. So I've gone from, from the sublime to the ridiculous. So everyone's got millions of kids here and no one's got any in Wellington.
You can't win.
You can't win. I thought this just isn't fair. And so that sort of coloured my whole view of Devonport. We call it sort of, at home we call it, as a joke, we call it the Truman Show. And because it is so pleasant and nice and lovely and everyone says hello and you beautiful walks and trails, which I do. And it gives me that very calm background now, because now that I work and I have my own work, that I can come back to, and I walk along the beach with my dog in the morning before I start work. So it's, for me, it's a rock now. It gives me the peace and solace before I go off into some of my crazy jobs that I do. But I do have to say one thing that's interesting, because a lot of people feel as if this is very deeply in their bones, of which I'm sure it is. But for me, I have a sort of dual home. I have a tūranga waiwai. Mine's in Motueka and also in Wellington. So it's my heart's still down there. It's just the same sort of feeling though. But this is a very pleasant and green land. But let's just stop cutting the trees down. That's all I'm doing. I'm going to start climbing up them soon.
Absolutely. Well, I hate to tell you, but I had 20 million thousand questions about consent, about how do we honor our bodies, about of what we should tell our daughters. But let me say a few closing, indulge me, a story. After all, we are in a library, and I am a journalist by trade. I can't help myself. When I was a young woman, about Augustine's age, I just graduated from university, and I found my first job in Chicago, and I didn't like it. I mean, I hated it. I was someone's assistant, and I was ghostwriting speeches. And it took me years and years to figure out that I wanted to write my own words. And every evening, I would pack myself up like a sardine, and I would get onto my usual bus route home. And if any of you have lived in big cities, you stand nose to nose with strangers, and you hold on to that bar as you turn the corners, and the windows are all steamed up from all our collective breath, remember? And one day, as I was sardining myself home as usual, I peered over someone's shoulder, and through the window outside, I saw an empty lot where a building must have been demolished. But against the brick wall of the buildings that remained, someone had graffitied in huge letters, as big as a house, dream, then a / fast. And this is what's so strange. Every day after that, no matter what direction I was facing as I was standing in the bus, no matter whose briefcase was shoved up my nose or blocking my view, even though I never consciously thought to look out for it, for some reason, someone would move slightly or another person would suddenly sit down just at the exact moment that we passed that empty lot. And suddenly, there would be the message again. So, for some days it felt like it was mocking me. Other days it felt like a French horn calling from above. Other days it felt like a slap, an in-your-face rebuke, because I sure as hell was not living my dreams. And one day, I actually got a seat on the bus. I know, a shock in Chicago. And I put on my headset and I closed my eyes for a few minutes. And when I opened them, we had stopped. I turned my head to look out the window, and sure enough, there we were. It was early December, and someone had strung fairy lights across the empty lot, and it was now filled with Christmas trees, their branches dusted white with snow. We didn't move. And after a few minutes, the driver announced there was a problem, and everyone had to get off the bus right there. Does the universe ever speak to you? I got out, and I just stood there. The words, dream fast, staring me down. And I said to myself, what the fuck are you trying to tell me? You see, then, at age 21, I thought I needed to dream faster, to move faster toward my goals. And right then, I probably did. But here's the twist. As I was standing in the shower this morning, 30 years, more than 30 years later, wondering, what do I want to tell my daughter? I realize that I finally get whatever that kismet or karma or higher snow woman power was trying to tell me then. And it is this. Hold fast to your dreams. No one teaches our children that dreams don't stay static, that they grow and shrink and morph in size and shape as you do over a lifetime. What was utter fantasy to you at, say, age 17, sleeping next to a man that you love every night, may have become totally unnoticed reality by age 32. And you know that huge, important chairmanship or professorship or the new title that you got at age 42? It doesn't hold any more weight at 62. Because at 62 or 72, hopefully, at least I'm looking forward to this, I'm too busy thinking about how to give back. And that's how it should be. But here's the key. Are you, all of the 100 of us today in this room, living what you preach? Ask yourself, have you sat down in your life lately and allowed yourself to dream what you want next, now? I know you have to pick up the kids from soccer and run to New World to get something, and my God, someone forgot to put out the recycling fucking again this morning. But have you cleared maybe just 1 hour, maybe just every year on your birthday, or perhaps this next New Year's Eve, to proactively envision what could be for you, what you will model to the next generation next? To every daughter sitting in this room tonight, yes, every daughter, whether you have outlived your mother or you have not become one, whether you are 25 or 75, I want to say this. You owe us, every one of us. Your grandmother or your great-grandmother may have left her home and everything she loved, everyone she loved, to come here for a better life, for a new chance. Your mother has and had dreams for you too, to go further, to be better than her deficits, whether created by institutional patriarchy or that no one taught her that she deserved a bigger horizon. In this community especially, to each one of us who has never gone hungry except when we're dieting, who have always had a room over our heads except when we're camping, who have always known the right to vote, who have taken for granted that the highest office in the land is now held by a woman, and our third one at that. You, all of you, are standing on their shoulders. They are waiting to hear your voice. I don't care what age you are sitting in this room and what it can teach the women coming up behind us. So listen up. Tell your daughters and your granddaughters and your nieces, and most of all, yourself this. Every time you don't even attempt to negotiate your salary, every time you let that sexist remark go because he's such a well-meaning bloke, every time you don't exercise your right to vote, every time you ignore that voice inside you that says, I wish, I wish, I wish, you are betraying, yes, I'm using the word betraying, every woman whose fight for more gave you the privilege you hold so easily in your hand today. To these gorgeously brained women whose energy, drive, insight, and artistry contribute to this community and far, far beyond it, thank you for giving back to us tonight. And for our daughters, the daughter you were and the woman you are still becoming, I wish you this challenge. Hop on Chicago's number 11 Lincoln Park bus. It could change your life.
Well,
Thanks for coming tonight, everyone.